Architecture moves culture and culture moves investments. So I came across Norman Foster and some of his talks and writings, and I was pretty inspired by his thoughts how this whole crisis right now could shape architecture and culture going forward. And I think it's actually an angle that we never really look at that much. We do look at sometimes, particularly things like advertising and culture and how it's moving. But for the investment world, architects typically don't come first on top of the list. But I think in this case, particularly when it comes to what we call distributed living, I think we should take a deeper look, and it has very large implications for companies like Tesla. This is the Not Even Wrong podcast. It's October 16, 2020. This is Krim Delco. For the day, we're down around 3% since the last update yesterday, which was during the day. We are now, for the year, up 222%, and the market is up roughly 8%. We're outperforming by 214%. And let's get just back into it. So Norman Foster, probably the most important influential architect still alive, and really an amazing personality. Whoever doesn't know him should go back and just read his history, and a very interesting person. Anyway, long story short, this is not about architecture here, but this is a typical sort of sideshow that we think can be much more than a sideshow. It can be actually the show, which is a cultural shift, a cultural change from basically city living, the way we have known it for the last 30, 40 years. Norman Foster actually been one of the main characters of rebuilding the modern city. And now we believe there is a shift towards distributed living, which means living in a very different way. It could be in a city, it could be outside of a city, but the key is that most of the things that we associated with urban living, which is job, school, find your mate, find your educational stuff that you need to do, universities, whatnot, again, like school for your kids, all these things are distributed or going to be distributed, meaning they're going to be in some sort of digital form, and hence you will be free to live wherever you want. I think this is a much, much longer term trend than just a knee-jerk reaction to the virus crisis, because quite frankly, most people are sick and tired of living in the cities, because despite all the efforts that people like Norman Foster and a lot of people around him made to kind of save the city and make the city livable, and correct all the mistakes that were done between the 30s and the 60s of the last century, when cities were growing like mushrooms and were built without any regards to community, without any regards to some sort of humanity. And I know what I'm talking about. I've been living in Manhattan for 15 years, so there is no humanity left in a city like that. Now, some people might like that, some people might be intrigued by that, particularly young people, but it still is a very difficult place to live. And now with the advent of distributed living, and I'm going to define distributed living in a short while, but I just want to say, with the advent of distributed living, you don't have to endure that. So you will have two forces now. One is, of course, the urban planners will continue trying to make the city more livable, and it's happening. It's happening in New York. It's happening in I don't know, Shanghai, even Bangkok, or any kind of city you want, Berlin. It is happening. These cities are becoming more livable. But on the other hand, of course, distributed living opens up a lot more new avenues. And now let me jump into the definition of distributed living. Distributed living means that you can live, work, play, raise kids in a distributed fashion. It's almost like cloud computing, where you can have an application here, an application there, in a sense that you can, let's say, live in Salt Lake City, work for a company in the Bay Area, educate your kids with a school that is based in Stanford, and so on and so forth. There's certain things you can't do in a distributed way. For example, you can't play on a soccer team in a distributed way. You still have to be 11 people on the pitch playing against other people. So at least if you don't want to play digitally, of course, but if you want to still play the real game, you have to be present. So, which is, for example, a problem that we're facing right now with our life situation. We are on the verge of going to distributed living. Our business is fully digital. Our education might go digital in terms of our kids going all digital. Some of them are already, the others are on the verge of becoming all digital. But my son is a elite soccer player, and he has to be somewhere where there's top teams. He can't just go and live in Montana or somewhere where there's no teams. So there are some issues like that. But anyway, what is the definition of distributed living? Distributed living, in a nutshell, is what Elon Musk is actually propagating for Tesla, which is you have your house with your solar panels, your battery, and your car. You're completely independent of anything, any kind of utility, any of that stuff. Your job is digital remote, your education's digital remote, your kids are playing most of the time either on digital platforms, or they're playing somewhere else, even in physical form, but it doesn't matter. You can live pretty much anywhere you want, make friends, physical or digital, but you're free to be wherever you want. And I think I mean, the exodus is already happening. And again, it's happening as a knee-jerk reaction. You're paying, $5,000 for a two-bedroom in San Francisco. You don't have to be in San Francisco. Well, of course, you're gonna go move back to Missouri or wherever you're from, and lower your cost of living. That's a knee-jerk reaction. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about people being afraid of living in Manhattan and living, in their houses in the Hamptons for a while just because they're scared of the virus. That's knee-jerk. I'm talking about long-term trends, a little bit similar to the 50s when they built the highway system in the United States, and this whole exodus from the inner city happened because people moved to the suburbs, and they could because they had cars and roads. That was maybe sort of distributed living 1.0. Distributed living 2.0 is a lot more aggressive. It's, like I said, it's living independently of utilities, for example, living completely powered by solar power. So you're not dependent on things like gas tax or all that stuff that you're just independent. You're powering yourself with solar. You have your kids are educated in digital form one way or the other, either through traditional means and just going on Zoom, or even full online type of educations where, of course, there's some physical meetings and all that stuff. I don't know how it's going to pan out. There are certain interesting concepts where the classroom's reversed and people, they go to school, but they spend a lot of time at home. Bottom line is you're independent. You can live wherever you want, and you can live a full life wherever you want. So what we believe, and this is also on our own experience, that people will start moving towards activities and not jobs. So meaning, I'm going to move to Salt Lake City because I want to ski there. I'm going to live in the Bay Area because I want to surf there, and not because I need to work there. Because again, distributed living means I can live pretty much anywhere I want and do my job wherever I want. Now, there are lots of caveats here, and there's a lot of things that implies. I think if you have such cultural shifts, such massive cultural shifts, everything changes. The urban architecture changes, the kind of education you need to get the kinds of jobs which are going to survive in a distributed form. You need to change your education. So, for example, if you have a job now that requires physical presence, well, that maybe is not such a good job. Maybe you should think about it. And it's a little bit crazy, but it's really worth thinking about it. My brother's a surgeon. I'm like, listen, you're one of those jobs that is kind of obsolete because you need to be physical. He said, no, that's not true. I can do remote stuff with robots. So if your job is not capable of being done remote, then you should just think about your job. But anyway, this is just sort of on a personal level. But as far as the investment level is concerned, I think we haven't been thinking a lot about this cultural shift, this social shift, which is happening, which we believe will be happening. And again, this was inspired by Norman Foster, who gave a speech recently about how, let's say, cholera changed the way London the urban planning of London was changed. For example, cholera introduced the whole sewage system in London. I think it was tuberculosis started influencing architecture to become a lot more, bring more light into housing, because apparently vitamin D, which is produced through sunlight, is very important to prevent tuberculosis. So you have these pandemics and illnesses and social catastrophes, which actually drive cultural shifts, massive cultural shifts. And of course, we know from unfortunately from history that other catastrophes such as wars, World War I, World War II, they also drove massive cultural shifts. World War II brought emancipation of women, emancipation of colored people, etc., through the civil rights movement. So there's of course also these types of catastrophes that can lead to social change. We are now living in a kind of a war. This crisis is a war, and we have a social change which we believe will translate into what we call social distributed living, and that has massive implications for a company like Tesla. And this is a new angle. It doesn't change a lot about our view on the company, and the valuation is just another, I would say, another puzzle that just fits really well into the story. Of course, again, it's all about execution. So yeah, it's futile to talk about the multi-$100 billion opportunity here if they can't execute, if they can't deliver the kind of solar power and the kind of storage and distributed networking that is necessary to drive this distributed living. But let's just assume execution is going to happen. We could have a situation where you have your house, which, by the way, is designed in a very different way, because you need more space, you need more light, you need more space for your kids to study, for yourself to work. So the house has to be redesigned. You have your solar panels, you have the auto bidder, which makes your house a part of a distributed power plant, which is basically in accordance, of course, also with your storage, where you're loading up on electricity whenever the sun shines, and then using it, and then whenever you need more electricity, you buy it, and when you have too much, you sell it, and the auto bidder software does all of that. So this is a scenario that we envision, which is not that far away, that is has enormous business potential for Tesla and other companies, of course, and it also has massive influence on other types of businesses, commercial real estate, residential real estate in cities. Cities as a whole will have to change, which is another interesting concept. And also, for example, retail, which is a massive industry and has huge implications on the kinds of architectures and the kinds of cultures that we see around the cities. They will have to change. And we've spoken about this in one of our recent episodes, where we spoke about new ideas. And we believe that social distributed marketing, which is this idea that you have products and services which are sold through influencers and really only live in the digital world, that there's no retail whatsoever, that there's no expectations of any kind of bricks and mortar, kick the tire type of buying, and the sort of the online commerce 3.0, which is the next level from Amazon, where you're not just buying products that you could buy in Walgreens or in Whole Foods or wherever online, but you're expecting those products, which could be physical products, not just digital products, but those products only live in the digital world and are delivered to you through physical means, if they're physical products. But this obviously fits into this distributed living concept, which is, and you could have them delivered by a drone, for example, but it just doesn't absolutely require any kind of retail space, any mall, any shopping mall, none of that stuff. So then the question is, of course, how is the city going to look in the future? The city of the future is going to look very different. We envision something, and I think I keep getting back to Salt Lake City. It's an interesting place. Maybe it's just because I've been there recently, but it's a very interesting place. It's an activity-driven place, because you only live there if you have any kind of business doing outdoor activities, climbing and skiing and mountain biking. Really high level, high quality type of stuff, that if you're into those types of sports, you then, however, you also have a kind of an urban environment. You have restaurants which are spread around. They're not in in a nice little cute street a la Greenwich Village, New York, or Paris or something. But there are restaurants, there is urban life, there are even bars and things like that. But it just feels different. There's also a lot of cool people. It's not a boring place, but it's not your city that you're used to. It's not downtown New York or Miami or whatever, or Chicago. It's different, but it's still urban. But again, in a very distributed way. Stuff is distributed physically, but also you don't feel on top of each other. You have that freedom and the space to do whatever you want, wherever you want. So there's a lot of new things which I think are added to this new type of city, which could emerge in places that are like I said before, that are activity driven. So you have still places that are interesting as urban or centers. So for example, another interesting city is Reno, same thing, very activity driven. And I'm not just talking about that thing, the Burning Man thing, but the real activities there, like climbing again, skiing. Cities like, for example, Bishop in the eastern Nevada, in the eastern Sierra, same thing. It's unbelievably interesting, and I would think Bend, Oregon is such a place. These cities have been popular even before this whole crisis, but it was more like, again, this kind of like a first level of remote work where people maybe lived there for a while or lived there long term and then worked remote or at places like in the Bay Area, for example. But now we see that the opportunity for people to actually go there full time, live there, and not just always be kind of an attachment to something, but this is it. This is the way you live, and there's no, well, we might go back to the mothership in whatever Mountain View or something like that. No, that's it. That's where you live. That's where you work. This is your livelihood, and this distributed living will open up a lot new avenues, a lot more new business opportunities, and one of them, of course, again, is Tesla. We will spend more time on this. Also, we feel like this is a very interesting concept where if you talk to architects, artists, designers, retail people, you might come up with very interesting new ideas of how the world could look like in 20 years, and that is very important for a fund manager. Because as I often stated, our mission is to generate wealth by investing in disruptive technologies with large impact. So if we can see how the next 10, 20 years evolve from a social perspective, from a cultural perspective, I believe we can also fulfill our mission. Thank you.